Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome into another episode of Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Thursday, October 17th, and in a little bit, we're going to hear from Baylor football Chief of Staff, Jeff Grigus, who Grayson spoke to earlier this week about his role with Baylor football. But first, Grayson and I are going to give our defensive keys to the game for Baylor football against Texas Tech this Saturday, a game that will kick off at 3 o'clock p.m. Central Time on ESPN2 in Lubbock. And Grayson, man, I think that there's a lot of concerns about Baylor's defense after that showing against Iowa State. I think Iowa State has a really good, balanced offensive approach. Their ability to be explosive. They average over 9 yards per attempt off passing the ball, but they also run it really well. I think in general, it's maybe the most balanced team in the league right now in terms of passing and throwing and the ability to do both. Even though it's not necessarily designed to be this explosive passing offense, they have shown it to be explosive the last couple of weeks against Baylor and West Virginia. But now Baylor goes against Texas Tech, who is also balanced, maybe haven't shown nearly as much ability or want to throw the football down the field a ton, not as high of yard per average, but they run the football really well with Taj Brooks. And Baylor's going to have its handful against this offense in Lubbock. And if they want to win, they're going to have to do several things really well in this particular game.
They are. There's a lot that they're going to have to do well. And it makes it kind of a scary matchup, especially going on the road. Baylor really has not done a great job when they're having to face a team that can throw the ball really well and run it well. And they've allowed it a few times. Like against BYU, they kind of gave up quite a few rushing yards and they gave up a ton of passing yards early. You look at the game against Utah early in the game, they kind of gave up explosives. It wasn't maybe consistent, but it was explosive plays kind of here and there. And then of course, Colorado kind of scored a lot late. And so it's just kind of all these things stacking up, all culminating with that Iowa State performance in which the defense didn't really do anything well, especially by the second half. And so I think that's what makes this scary is now you're facing a team that can run and pass the ball pretty well and have had some success in both areas. And so now it comes down to, how do you decide to defend this team? And, can you do the things that you need to do in order to be successful?
Yeah. And that leads me to my first point. And I'll start this off for us. And it's something that I don't feel like that Dave Aranda did well. Specifically, Dave Aranda in his game plan was find what you want to take away and take it away. They can't go into this game and say, we're going to try to do both. Like, let's try to stop the run. Let's try to stop it with our base defense. Let's try to stop the pass with our base defense. I don't think that's going to work. We saw against Iowa State, who I believe is a better offense in general, especially efficiency-wise than Texas Tech. But Texas Tech is similar in that they want to do both and can do both. They have talented playmakers on the outside, obviously a really good running back, Taj Brooks, and then a quarterback that can get the ball where it needs to go. I mean, it's not always the most efficient. He's not throwing a ton of balls downfield. He can, but not a ton downfield, just kind of as a addition to their run game. But Dave Aranda has to say, we're going to take something away. I personally believe you have to say, we're going to take Taj Brooks away and say, okay, Barron Morton, you beat us on the outside and see if our defensive backs can tackle. And fortunately for Baylor, they have some guys coming back. It doesn't mean that they're going to be the best tackling defenders, but I think that if you're willing to take away that run game, you're going to have more success. But if you go into it and you can't take, they're like, well, heck, they're going to still run the football. Well, then you can shift back, but you can't be willing to say, we're going to try to stop you with our base defense, because if so, Texas Tech might have the ball for 40 minutes of this game if they can't stop the run, because Baylor, they haven't shown the ability to necessarily stop the run consistently, especially what we saw against Iowa State.
I agree 100%. This was going to be my first key as well if you didn't take it. Baylor's got to stop the run, specifically Taj Brooks, because Tech's other running backs really haven't done much this season. It pretty much is going to, lie on Taj Brooks' shoulders how well they run the football. And so it's going to come down to, can Baylor match the physicality of the offensive line, and can they tackle Taj Brooks when they get opportunities to, instead of allowing him to run through tackles and get an extra, 3 or 4 yards every time he runs the football. I think when you go back and look at how Tech has done this year, it's very clear that the games where they did not run the football well were the games where they struggled the most offensively. And you look at Washington State, for instance. Yes, Tech averaged 5.5 yards per carry, but they only ran for 148 yards. They were down pretty much that whole game. And so it was kind of empty calories in the run game there, just to move the football some. But again, they only scored 16 points in that game. Then you look at Arizona State, a game they won, a game they scored 30 points. They were fine, but they only ran for 133 yards on 39 carries. That's 3.4 yards per carry. Arizona State shut the run game down, and it gave them a chance at the end of that game to potentially tie it and win it. And so, again, they slowed down Tech a little bit. And then finally, the Arizona game, Tech only ran for 117 yards, and they scored 28 points. Again, I think if Baylor's going to win this game, they got to keep Tech probably in that, probably somewhere around that 31 to 28 area. I think if you start getting into like 37, 38, I think it's probably going to be a little bit insurmountable for Baylor to score that many points. So yeah, I think that is in general the biggest key to this game. That's been the area that when teams have been able to slow down the run game, Tech has been far less efficient than when teams, haven't been able to stop Taj Brooks.
Yeah. And I think the key within that key comes down to me, 4 players. Obviously it starts with Baylor's linebackers, starts with Matt Jones and Keaton Thomas, who have both, and to my credit, I haven't looked this up since the Iowa State game, and I know it's gone down, but they have been a solid tackling unit. They don't miss a ton of tackles. I know that they did against Iowa State, so I'm sure those numbers have jumped up. But at one point, they were both ranked inside the top 30 nationally in terms of missed tackle percentage. They have to be good in this game. But on top of that, Baylor really needs Garmin Randolph and Steve Linton on the edge to be athletic and keep those plays from bouncing. Taj Brooks wants to hit the hole and then find that escape route. He wants to go and then bounce it out and get his additional 25 yards. He's very good at that. And Baylor needs someone on the edge, if he's getting flushed outside, that can come back inside and make plays. I think Steve Linton specifically, we've seen it a few times where he kind of explodes, kind of like a bottle rocket, and he takes off and he'll go and hit somebody, chase down a running back specifically. And that's the one, I think, kind of as good as Taj Brooks is, he's not just going to take off and leave you. You're not going to see Jalen Jackson from Iowa State with Taj Brooks. He's different. And so you have to get him on the ground, or he's going to go for another. He's tough to get on the ground. And so those particular guys have to be able to get him on the ground and let that 4-yard gain be a 4-yard gain. Don't let it turn into a 25-yard gain because you miss a tackle. And it's tough. It's not going to be easy, but I think Baylor is big enough and fast enough in that general area of the field that they can limit him, especially after you see what Arizona State and Arizona did specifically. And then obviously you look to the Washington State game without Taj Brooks, but those guys have to make tackles. The precedent is there to slow them down. It's just, can you do it? Because they're going to absolutely try to make you do it.
They are. And I found this to be kind of fascinating when I looked at, what Tech's offensive line has done so far this year. And I like looking at the PFF grades because I think it gives you more of an idea of kind of what's going on. They're not blocking very well as a unit, run blocking wise. And I think that's shown up in a few of these games, but Taj Brooks is just such a good player that he's able to overcome that. And, many running backs aren't able to, but they really don't have, guys that have really risen to the occasion from a run blocking standpoint. Their best run blocker by far is Dalton Merriman, who's also their best overall offensive lineman there at the tackle position. He's really good, but outside of that, it's all in the 60s or 50s or, even lower than that for someone like Sterling Porcher, the transfer from Middle Tennessee State. He's got a rating all the way down at 46.5. And so I just think in general, Baylor's going to have opportunities, I think, to tackle Taj Brooks. It's just a matter of, can they actually tackle him? But I do think that needs to be a focal point. Guys need to rally to the football. You can't assume that he's down if he's not. We've seen that at times with this team. And so when he's getting wrapped up, it needs to be a gang tackle type thing for Baylor to be sure to not allow him to get those extra couple yards that can be the difference between a first down or a touchdown or a turnover.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think with that, you look at that front seven, and that leads me into my second point is, to me, to win this game, Baylor's going to have to sack Baron Morton at least 3 times. If you look at their game against Arizona State, they gave up 2 sacks. They were sacked twice by Arizona. And then Cincinnati did not sack them once, which was just like a high fly. I mean, it was an old school Big 12 football game. Neither team was playing much defense. Like, it was truly from the jump back and forth. And it finished that way. Cincinnati misses the field goal that could have tied it and sent it into overtime. They miss it. Tech wins in regulation. But for Baylor, if your emphasis is starting to stop the run from the very beginning of the game, your defensive line needs to say, okay, we're reading pass in these run block situations, and now we're going to run the passer. And that means that it's your jacks or your edge positions and your linebackers are going to say, our key is run. If it's not there, we're rushing the passer. Dave Aranda is really good at that. I think you saw that in the Colorado game specifically, even though Colorado doesn't run it a ton, not nearly as much as obviously as Texas Tech does, but those guys have to read pass and then rush the passer. I don't think you have to send a ton of pressure. I don't think you have to blitz a lot of guys. I think you have to be creative of who's coming. Dave Aranda does a good job with that, but it's playing. That key for me is playing the run, but let it transition to the pass game. Baron Morton's going to get the ball out of his hand quick, so there's going to be opportunities when you don't. But those times that they are taking shots downfield, you can't let him be comfortable. Let him make mistakes. Let that pressure build up on him. We haven't really seen it. I mean, I mentioned it for the Iowa State game. Baylor didn't really have that opportunity, or I didn't feel like they put themselves in a position to say, we're going to go rush the passer, but they also didn't really say, we're going to take one thing away. We're not going to do 2 things really well in this game. And they just played base defense. It really felt like, and that could be wrong. Like, I don't have the best eye for all that stuff, but they just played straight up. I don't think they can afford to do that against Texas Tech. They have to figure out how to generate pressure when the pressure's the ability or the timing to create pressure is there.
And Tech has allowed pressures. I mean, in those games that they've struggled, they were giving up double-digit pressures. And my number was, I think, 2 sacks, but 10 pressures. Like, you got to have double-digit pressures. You got to be able to impact
move
the
him out of the
quarterback.
pocket. Yeah,
right. Force him to move around a little bit. Force him to be a little bit uncomfortable in certain situations. Force him to throw the football away too. Right. I mean, that's what pressures can lead to. I think in general, Tech is kind of facing a similar dilemma as Baylor is in regards to their offensive line, as they're better at pass blocking than they are in run blocking. And so they've kind of had to somewhat lean into that, even though their true strength as an offense is running the football. And so I think that's kind of going to be one of those things where, if Baylor can slow down the rushing attack and then kind of be able to pin their ears back more in true pass sets, I think there are some opportunities and specific Tech offensive linemen that you can maybe attack when you're pass rushing. And so, I do think that would be a key. I don't think they're going to get after Morton a ton. He's been pretty good at avoiding sacks and far improved from where he was a year ago at avoiding those sacks. And then obviously not turning the ball over as well. He's kind of made that a staple for them this season, which I think has helped their offense immensely.
Yeah, what's interesting, you look at Baylor's Big 12 games. You look at the starting with the Colorado game, not the Utah game, but starting with the Colorado game and then BYU and Iowa State. Colorado was the only game they registered a sack in any of those games, but they had 8 of them in that game. But I think it also sets up to what BYU and what Iowa State really do. And they're not going to give up a ton of sacks. They're going to get the ball out of the quarterback's hand. They're going to try to run the football and be efficient. They don't want to take negative plays. No one wants to take negative plays, but those offenses are really designed to say, we're not going to do it. In this particular game, this goes back to that more. It's not Colorado's offense. They don't run the ball enough. I mean, it really costs them in a lot of spots. They had negative 30 rushing yards against Kansas State over the last weekend. So it's not a great example, but I think it's more of the example of this is a spread offense. There's not going to be max protection with 2 receiver routes a lot of times. There's going to be a lot of guys in coverage. There's going to be opportunity for good numbers in the pressure game. And Baylor's going to have to get him on the ground. And I say 3 because that's the number I think that you have to get him 3 times to win this game. Maybe one of those is a fumble. Maybe one of those is a big play in this game, but they're going to have to get there. I think they have that capability. And it hasn't been discussed. We haven't really talked about this week, but like Steve Linton has to be pretty pumped for this game. And like
revenge
obviously
game.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. And it's interesting, like against Baylor last year, like I really want to know that conversation with Caleb Collins this week. Hey, you remember when you sacked Blake Shapen 3 times last year? Can you go and do that in Lubbock this year? Let's go get 3 more of these. I don't think Tech's going to give a ton of opportunities for just straight on pass rush. They're going to get the ball out of Morton's hands, but they have to have that ability to make him uncomfortable, especially if you're saying, okay, we're going to commit to stopping the run. And that's my game plan. That's not Dave Aranda's game plan. I don't know what he's going to do. But if they're committing to stop the run, those guys are around the line of scrimmage, well, then whenever Barron Morton needs to go throw the football, make him uncomfortable, make it tough for him to get the ball away. And that starts with guys like Steve Linton and Garmin Randolph and obviously Keaton Thomas and Matt Jones.
I think that it's a really good point because it just based off their previous results, when teams have been able to stop the run, they've also forced Barron Morton to throw the ball a lot. And that's where his inefficiencies, I think, pop up even more. And so the 3 games that I mentioned earlier, and this is another key to the game, I think it's a very simple key. I'm just going to kind of put a number for it. They need to keep Barron Morton's completion percentage under 60%. That is where they have struggled. You look at the Washington State game, he only completed 58.3% of his passes. You look at the Arizona State game, he was at 54.5. Then you look at the Arizona game, he was at 58.6. So it's kind of a reoccurring theme when their offense hasn't thrived, he's been inaccurate. Or at least, and that speaks to a lot of things. When your accuracy drops that low compared to your other games where he's completing probably like 68, 69% of his passes in those other games, it's clear that part of that is game flow, game situation. Part of it is the pressure that you're able to get on him. Part of it is taking away the run game and forcing a lot more 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7 type situations. So I think all of that really stopping the run, I think impacts him in that way as well. It also really shrinks his yards per carry or yards per attempt as well. That comes down to when he's been in situations like that where they can't use much play action or the RPO isn't as scary as it is when you can actually run the football. And so I think that's a key to this as well. Holding him under 60%, which it's been achieved 3 times. So I think Baylor's going to probably have to get around that number.
So kind of leading into all that, you need the defensive line to play well. But in general, turnover margin, Baylor has not won the turnover margin in a single game this year. They're 2-4. They've been even a couple times, but they haven't won the turnover margin. And in this particular game, Tech doesn't give it up a ton. Like they don't have a ton of interceptions. Barron Morton doesn't throw a ton of interceptions, but they also haven't been challenged. If you look at the teams they face, the teams that they face don't force a ton of turnovers. And so I'm really anxious, and they've obviously, if you look at the Arizona game, Arizona gives the ball up a ton. Arizona State has shown the tendencies to give the ball up a little bit. And in those games, Tech has gotten out to leads because of those issues. The Arizona State game, Texas Tech was up 14-0 almost immediately. You look at the Arizona State game, the Arizona game on the road, they get up pretty quick, pretty early in that game. And so I'm needing Baylor to go out in this game and get some turnovers, figure out how to shift that momentum from the crowd, up the turnover margin. They've shown they can force turnovers. And so some of this does go on the offense, but the defense needs to continue to create those opportunities and build on the turnover margin that they haven't had at all this season.
I think that will probably be influenced by guys being healthier. So you look at Carl Williams, he's supposed to be closer to 100%, according to Dave Aranda. Caden Jenkins is supposed to be back this week. I think that would be huge for their cornerbacks in this matchup. You mentioned Cooper Lands being healthier. I think Garmin Randolph is kind of in that same boat as he was dealing with an ankle injury as well. And so you kind of put all that together and you say, okay, well, this is the healthiest the defense has been all year. Now, can the turnover luck change? There's luck involved in that. There's also being around the football a lot, which I don't necessarily think Baylor has really been. I don't think they've had a ton of opportunities for turnovers, which is a problem It's something that Dave Aranda preaches a lot, and something that is a staple in Dave Aranda's defenses. It hasn't come to fruition yet. We'll see if it does on the road. I'm not necessarily banking on it, but they absolutely need to be at least even in the turnover margin, I think, to even have a chance to win this game.
Yeah, if you look at Tech's passing efficiency, it ranks 12th in the Big 12, which I thought that number it surprised me a little bit. But if you look at completion percentage sometimes, but they're 120.71 according to CFBstats.com. Baylor's passing efficiency defense, and a lot of this comes back to not forcing turnovers, ranks 13th at 143.58. Baylor, I think that's done. If you look at the Colorado game, they didn't have a lot of opportunities. Shedeur Sanders does a great job of avoiding those opportunities in the passing game, but they did create some against BYU in the second half. And then they had the one against Iowa State, it was kind of a mixed bag of some pressure that created Garmin Randolph's interception, but you kind of see it coming to life. Now it just needs to be, okay, let's create these havoc plays that result in turnovers more regularly. And getting guys healthy you mentioned it does help getting those guys back. Kendrick Simpions being one that kind of matches up with tight ends in the slot. But, in general, man, like if you want to win games on the road, you can't afford to be negative turnover margin. And your offense might turn them over, but your defense better be getting them too. And if you can be even, that's great. But I think they're really going to have to win the turnover margin to win this game.
I could definitely see that as well. I think too, if you're even, you have a chance. If you're at a deficit, you're not winning. If you're +1 or +2, you give yourself a great chance to win the game. And so,
that goes to Tech's defense, right? Like Tech's defense is not stopping anybody. So more than any game, it's kind of like, if you're not turning the ball over, they're going to give you opportunities to score the football. They've shown it all year. I mean, dating back to last year, they were better defensively last year. They lost a ton. We knew that going in, but like they do not really stop the ball unless they're forcing turnovers. They do get third down stops, but it's kind of that, are you beating yourselves or are they beating you? They do. I think the way that Tim DeRuyter calls defense for his entire career has been, hey, we're going to make you be in uncomfortable situations, but we can't always stop you. That's kind of what he's made the living of doing. Baylor cannot stop themselves. Fortunately, Sawyer Robertson has kind of shown that. And now we're getting to the offensive side of the ball, but like you've got to be careful of turnover margin in general because of the way Tech plays defense.
Definitely. And that is an area that Baylor's going to have to improve on throughout the season if they want to change their fortunes for this year. This kind of just brings me into kind of, I guess, my last takeaway really quick. I think that, over the course of the past year and a half, Baylor has really struggled against these teams that can spread you out and throw the ball all over the place. We saw it last year against TCU, where Josh Hoover's just throwing it all over the place. Texas, that's another animal, but they did the exact same thing, just doing whatever they wanted, throwing the football. Texas Tech last year as well. And now coming into this year, it's like they haven't really faced a team that's going to spread you out with the kind of wide receivers that Tech has. Iowa State to a certain extent, but Iowa State has 2 guys. Tech has like 6 guys that can really go at the wide receiver position. They got a good tight end in Jalen Conyers. They're wide receivers. I mean, Micah Hudson, Coy Eakin, Josh Kelly, Caleb Douglas, like they have a bunch of guys and they can roll out and put you in uncomfortable situations as a defense, whether it's in 5 wide sets or, 4 wide sets with a running back. And so I think this game is also a big test for Dave Aranda, and just, I'm kind of looking at it and very fascinated by it. Can Baylor make the adjustments to where they can deal with an offense like this? Because unfortunately, if they can't, that bodes really poorly for a couple of the games they have coming up, specifically against TCU, Oklahoma State to a certain extent as well, if they continue to not be able to run the football. So I think this game can be also pretty telling in that regard as well.
Yeah, I think to a similar degree, Colorado was that. The issue is Colorado doesn't run the football. Texas Tech, they can spread you out and they can hit you with Taj Brooks. So like it's that thin you out to run the football, is that the ability's there where Colorado didn't have it. Now, I think they're better for having faced Colorado for this particular matchup because of the level of receivers there. I mean, you start with Travis Hunter and then work your way down. We saw it against Kansas State. By the time their guys were dropping like flies, Colorado was still running guys out there. Mario Miller gets hurt, which looked like a pretty bad injury in that game. But he was like their 5th receiver. He had the big play against Baylor. So I think that helps him. Now it's like, if you have 5 guys in the box, can you stop the run with those guys? how can you adjust to it? So I'm with you. I think it's a different type of challenge than they faced this season because of that. But yeah, I mean, those are the defensive keys. I don't have any more. I don't know if they win this game with defense. I think they need to do enough with defense in this particular game. But at the same time, I think the precedent has been set with Arizona State of how you can go about shutting down that Tech offense to an extent. And I'm anxious to see it. I don't think that Arizona and Arizona State have superior talent on the defensive side of the ball. It's just about execution. Guys have to be comfortable in going out there and doing those things and figuring out how to go and win this particular game. So any final thoughts before we pitch it off to your interview with Jeff Grigus?
Dave Aranda got a full 2 weeks to get ready for this game, and he's one of the best defense coordinators in the business. Obviously, Baylor's head coach, but also defensive coordinator. I'm very curious, what kind of adjustments he made during the bye week, and if he can get these guys to play at a much higher level than I think we've seen so far this year, specifically be consistent.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the offseason changes, was Dave Aranda becoming the defensive coordinator for scheming for these games. Not that they had this game circled by any means, other than the fact that they got thumped last year in Waco. But I think that Dave Aranda has to have a good plan for his defense and have them ready to execute. There's a good balance of that. So with all that said, we're going to pitch it to Grayson's interview with Jeff Grigus, is Baylor's football chief of staff, to talk to everything about he's doing. He's been with the program for a while, but now we get to hear from him and exactly what he's doing now that he is in Waco, kind of entrenched alongside Dave Aranda.
What's going on, Baylor fans? I'm happy to be talking today with Baylor Chief of Staff, Jeff Grigus. Jeff, thanks for joining the show, man. Really appreciate it.
No, Grayson, I appreciate the opportunity to kind of give it a little insight of Baylor football and also give it a little insight on what I do on a day-to-day basis.
So I know you do a lot of facilities and operations, but I do want to just kind of get your thoughts just kind of on the start to the season. What have you kind of seen from Baylor so far? I know it's been some tough finishes, but what are some of your takeaways on the early part of the season?
Early part of the season, going into Game 7, Week 8, our guys are resilient. I feel that they have everything there. They just got to finish out each game. Not only we had some tough losses, but in the locker room, the morale's still high. I still have a high respect for all the seniors and all the older guys on the team. Truly think that we have a whole half a season left. There's a lot of football left to play.
So I heard that you had a really busy August and that you were kind of heading up the transition into the Fudge Development Center. I mean, I don't know where you want to start on that, but you got to take me through kind of that process.
So first off, I want to thank Mac and Jeremy Fudge for giving us the opportunity to move into a brand new building. I know it was on Mac's master plan, and then getting Jeremy involved was instrumental into moving in this August. However, we were planning on moving in July 27th, the week prior to the team reporting back August 1st. Construction delays, weather delays, some changes in the plans kind of pushed us to the second week in fall camp, which was August 17th. What does that look like for the chief of staff, the operations staff, even the recruiting and everybody not on the field? So we actually, once we came on to an official move-in date, which was Saturday during the scrimmage, so not optimal. So what did that involve? We basically pre-packed everything that we could. Again, we're game planning for the first game. We're still in the middle of fall camp. So other than the coaches' computers, game plans for that week, we had everything packed up, personal items. I was actually lucky enough to do the move when I was at LSU. So I had firsthand account of just the customer service side of things. So none of the full-time coaches, none of the analysts had to touch their belongings. We took pictures of every office. So on that day of the move, 5:30 p.m., we didn't finish setting the offices until around 2 a.m. that night, which involved our operations staff, recruiting staff, anybody that wasn't off the field. So when the coaches came in to watch film Sunday at 10 a.m., they were ready to go. Luckily, we only had one or two hiccups IT-wise, but it was a very streamlined transition. We're still in the finish timeline of punch list right now, so we have a few things, contractors in and out the building. But really my goal was to limit the distractions to not only Coach Aranda, but our 10 on the field coaches.
I'm sure you're a huge facility guy. That's a huge part of your job. So when you look at Baylor's, newest addition, as far as a facilities perspective goes. How does it compare to maybe the other facilities that you've seen across the country, if you've seen a bunch of them?
No, Grayson, that's a great question. So in regards to facilities across the country, we're in the top tier. Can't compare really from LSU to Alabama, which I looked at when we were redesigning LSU's. We have everything for the student athlete, from the locker room to the treatment facility to the nutrition area and to our weight room, which is, I believe, the largest in Texas, which is about 14,000 square feet compared to where we're coming from the old athletics building where it was a joint weight room. So that's one thing. Vic and his staff are not having to schedule around other sports, and that other sports don't have to schedule around us. So it's really a great addition to Baylor athletics.
What are your favorite areas of the building, but also what is the one that you feel like is the most important for the football team in general?
So one of my favorite things, and being at the old facility, is I was sharing an office, and a lot of people, not only in football, were sharing offices, but our mental health was sharing offices. I think one of the great additions is everybody over here, it was planned for to have their own area. Each position group was able to have their own area. So really the space added was probably one of the best things at this building that Jeremy and Mac had planned for our new staff. For the players, I think not only the locker room, but the training room. So Tim Pike, our head trainer, has a phenomenal area downstairs with all doctors, all treatment areas, where he can service the student athletes to the best ability to get them back on the field.
Oh man, that's awesome. And is this your new office right here?
Correct. It's my new office. Still got a few
Nice.
boxes. Got to hang up some things on the wall, but really just wanted to get everybody else in the building set before I kind of set my area. So.
Definitely understand that. So this is your first year as chief of staff. You were the assistant AD for operations. What has really changed about your role? Where do you see the biggest changes, I guess?
So that's one thing I've learned in my career is I started off in 2006. I was a student manager all the way up until I graduated in 2010 under two head coaches, Coach Miles and Coach O. Just learning the background and then transitioning into operations. I had the opportunity to learn from one of the best in the country. He was our director of football ops, Coach Sam Nader. He retired after 44 seasons. So what I learned kind of from the bottom up to the top, and then which transitioned into this role, is really just everybody in the building is important. And it takes everybody. It takes all 80 of our staffers to get the team to home and away games to get us through the season. So the main difference is really being the main point of contact through the head coach, and then also getting the head coach's word down to 80 individuals. So he doesn't have to have one-on-one meetings with 80 people. So it's really being able to cohesively hold everybody that's off the field together. So the head coach and the 10 full-time coaches can kind of hold everything together on the field.
You mentioned it kind of being a group effort, and I know this offseason, Dave Aranda really took over a huge role on the defensive side of the ball and really had to focus on ball, which he's mentioned a ton in the offseason to help other areas of the program thrive. Do you feel like your role has increased or changed or anything like that?
Correct. I've had the opportunity. Javon, our deputy AD, Overshone, has given me a lot of opportunities to sit in meetings that the head coach might need to sit in, but he's with the defensive staff just to help push the program in the right direction, and then to help assist the head coach, give him a little bit extra more time to do the defense installs, meet with the defensive staff, meet with his position group, the linebackers. So.
Now, you had the chance to work with Dave Aranda at LSU as well. What would you say are kind of the biggest differences from Dave Aranda then to kind of who he is now?
So just from, like I was saying, the transition from Dave from head coach to helping more defense coordinator. One thing I've really, truly loved about Coach is he hasn't changed. He's still, him and Miss Dion, the three kids are still the same humble people when he was the DC at LSU to the time he came here when I was not with him from that 2020 to the 2021 season. But honestly, Dave has not changed other than he has a heavy role with our defensive staff now.
So I do have to ask, of course, I need you to take me through kind of getting ready for a road trip. Baylor's about to go on a road trip to Lubbock. Take me through that process. What does this entail? Because I don't know that anyone really knows if you haven't been a part of it before.
So Grayson, that's a phenomenal question because had the opportunity a few weeks ago to speak on that. So we actually do all of our advanced work a year out. Once the schedule's set, Landry Walsh, who's our new director of football ops, will go out, scout the away game facility. So she went out to Lubbock this past summer. We'll go to a few hotels, see if there's any new builds, anything we can change. Lubbock, is a smaller community, kind of like Waco, where there's only one or two hotels. The home team, of course, takes the better hotel. So we're at a smaller hotel. Once we get all that worked out, we bring that in front of coach. End of the summer, he approves all of our contingent run plans. And then we get into the season. So each hotel that we've picked gets a 35-page kind of dossier of what our needs are. And that's everything from Wi-Fi codes to how many beds. So this week we'll be traveling to Lubbock. We'll be staying at the Hilton Garden Inn. Great property, great people to work for or work with. We'll take up the whole hotel. There's 113 beds. And then with the travel contingency. So once we set the schedule, which we set on Sunday with Coach Miranda, we'll kind of transition into making sure that those other 80 people know the when and where to be. So at that time, gearing up. So tomorrow's Thursday. Landry will advance the team with our head dietitian and one of our equipment staff. They will meet the 18-wheeler, which will arrive usually Friday morning to set up the team locker room. And then we'll get on the plane on Friday after our walkthrough, where Landry will meet us on the runway. We'll get on the charter buses and head to the hotel. But all involved, so this week, conference game, we'll travel 70 players, which is the conference limit. And then we'll have 80 other staffers. So that's basically 40 internal with football, another 20 administration, Baylor security, support staff. And then we'll have usually 10 to 15 donors from either Playfly or our B Association. Bear Foundation.
That's an incredibly extensive process, and I'm sure nothing ever goes wrong, right?
So you always plan for the worst. Again, the time that I enjoy the best is as soon as the wheels are up. Usually have an hour to 2 hour nap till the wheels come down. This past year, this past 3 road games, we haven't had any issues. When we were flying into Colorado, it just happened. The tower scheduled the Denver Broncos to fly out. Again, I had known that in advance. I'd briefed Mac, I'd briefed Coach Rand and Javon. So we actually sat on the runway on a de-icing patch for about 45 minutes. Not optimal, but again, I had a plan. Once we got on the buses, coach will bump dinner back 30 minutes, still give the players the time, doesn't affect any of our meetings at the hotel.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for joining the show. And please be careful traveling up to Lubbock. I know that's going to be a fun time, I'm sure, but also, a lot of work.
Grayson, I really appreciate it. And again, thank you for the opportunity to kind of give the day in the life of Jeff Grigus.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Jeff. And Baylor fans, thanks for listening, and sick 'em.